I am Brigadier N Bahri, a product of the National Defence Academy and the IMA. I was commissioned in June 1960 into the Brigade of the Guards, and having served for nearly 33 years, retired in 1993. The Army gave me a very varied and a very rich experience. I had the opportunity to participate in the 1962, 65, 71 wars. I spent 3 years in Nagaland battling insurgency. I had a year's tenure at Gaza as a peacekeeper. I had a tenure at the Defense Services Staff College on the faculty, which was very enriching. I did 3 tenures in high altitudes, that is beyond 9,000 feet in the mountains. Served in the desert, served overseas in Gaza, as I mentioned. So it's been a very varied and a very enriching experience. I've been mostly out in the field, of course, a small tenure at the Army headquarters. My last 3 years, I was the force commander with the NSG, which is the counter-terrorist force. That is a very enriching experience too. So all in all, I think the Army gave me tremendous opportunity to serve in all types of terrain, all types of parts of India, and even overseas with adequate opportunities to travel abroad. I had the good luck and fortune to go to France for nearly 2 months of training in anti-tank guided missiles. These weapons were being inducted into the Indian Army for the first time. So we learnt well, and within a short period, we were able to absorb this weapon system in our army and proved its worth in the 1971 war. An Indian peacekeeping force, IPKF, of a strength of up to 70,000 troops was invited by the government of Sri Lanka from July 1987 to March 1990 to help maintain peace in the northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka. I shall give you my perceptions on why this force was sent, how it performed, what it achieved, and what lessons were learnt. I joined headquarters IPKF in November 1987 as the head of logistics and remained so till 25th March 1990. It was primarily my charter to induct the force into Sri Lanka, both by sea and air, provided logistic support with all its manifestations, and then de-inducted to India by air and sea when so ordered by the Government of India. While my primary responsibility was logistics, I remained fairly well informed of all aspects of IPKF activities throughout their stay in Sri Lanka. The ethnic composition of Sri Lanka and their mutual relations have been a major factor in the state of law and order, economic development, and social well-being of the people of Sri Lanka. Therefore, a few words are relevant before I proceed further. It is believed that the majority Sinhala population of Sri Lanka owe their origin to migration from India's Orissa and West Bengal. The migration took place in the 2nd century before Christ as a fallout of the Kalinga War fought by Ashok the Great of India. The massive violence and killings, which on one hand gave impetus to Buddhism and the great Buddhist empire established by Emperor Ashok, it also led to large-scale migration to Sri Lanka. Today, the Sinhala are 74% of Sri Lanka's population. The second major ethnic component are the Tamils. While 14% are called the original Tamils, largely staying in the northern Jaffna and eastern Trincomalee areas, another 4% are Tamil plantation labor taken from India by the British for the plantations. These plantation Tamils are located in the central highlands called the Nivara Ilia area. Another 8% population of Sri Lanka are known as Moors. Their origin is perhaps from the Arab countries. They were by and large a peaceful trading community, though there have been some recent disturbing developments. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka has seen ethnic strife between the Tamils and the Sinhala communities going back over a long time. The major causes of this strife, to my mind, are two. Firstly, from the 15th century onwards, all foreign invaders, Portuguese, Dutch, and British, came in contact primarily with the Tamil population in the north. Therefore, all benefits and modern influences like education, commerce, and employment were gained by the Tamils. Secondly, and unfortunately, over the years, the two communities were not able to resolve their differences. In fact, post-independence, which was gained from the British in 1948, the differences have grown wider. To a large measure, this may be attributed to some wrong policies followed by succeeding majority governments. Progressively, the majority Sinhala governments at Colombo passed laws which kept placing the Tamils at a disadvantage. The last straw was the de-recognition of Tamil as an official national language in 1956. Large-scale riots broke out and many Tamil protest groups were formed. Gradually, the democratic and peaceful resistance groups were eliminated, and the more hardcore, virulent groups took shape, often with arms and support from outside powers. These Tamil groups, with their strong rivalries, fought amongst themselves and even resorted to extreme measures. Eventually, one dominant Tamil group emerged under the leadership of Virupillai Prabhakaran and was known as the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Ilam, LTTE for short. The LTTE stood for complete separation from Sri Lanka and formation of an independent Tamil state. They also claimed to be the only spokesman on behalf of all Tamils of Sri Lanka. Since India has a large Tamil population in Tamil Nadu, so close across the sea from Sri Lanka, very close social, economic, and emotional relations have existed between the two throughout history. The aspirations of the Tamils of Sri Lanka found emotional and practical support from the Indian Tamils. As a result of strife in Sri Lanka, large numbers of Sri Lankan Tamils took refuge in Tamil Nadu. Support of various kinds, including supplies, medicines, finance, and even arms, started flowing into Jaffna. Many intra-rival disputes were also being settled in India, often violently. Various political parties in Tamil Nadu saw opportunities and started voicing their support for the Sri Lankan Tamil groups. The LTTE and Prabhakaran were built up as heroes and saviors. The central Indian government could no longer ignore these developments and started talks with the government of Sri Lanka. India spoke chiefly on behalf of the Sri Lankan Tamils and also the LTTE. The Indian Air Force supply drop at Jaffna on 4 June 1987 without Sri Lankan government approval in order to relieve the beleaguered population of Jaffna gave a clear indication of the resolve of the Indian government. After numerous rounds of talks, an accord was arrived at. The major points of agreement and concessions obtained on behalf of the Tamils of Sri Lanka were: India supported the unity of Sri Lanka as one country. All Sri Lankan security forces in the Jaffna Peninsula would be confined to their barracks. LTTE would hand over all their arms to the IPKF at peace centers to be established by India. Sri Lanka would devolve administrative powers to the provincial governments. Tamil would be recognized as an official language. The Tamil majority region of Jaffna and Trincomalee would merge as one administrative unit after a referendum. a few words about the conduct of IPKF operations. The Indo-Sri Lanka Accord was signed on 29th July 1987, and on the same day, leading elements of the IPKF, at the invitation of Sri Lanka government, landed at Palali airfield to help implement the accord. The bulk of troops and equipment had to be inducted by sea via Trincomalee, since the nearest port of Kakesunturai, KKS for short, was blocked with a sunken pontoon. The IPKF, under the command of Major General Harkirat Singh, soon established contact with the local administration, the Indian High Commission at Colombo, the local security forces, as also the LTTE. Peace centers were established, but nothing much happened for the next 2 months. While the Sri Lanka security forces, honoring the accord, withdrew into their barracks, the LTTE was reluctant to hand over their arms. An unfortunate incident occurred on 5 October 1987. 12 Tamil Tigers were arrested at sea by Sri Lankan Navy and brought to Palali airfield, Jaffna, to be taken to Colombo for interrogation. All 12 swallowed cyanide pills and committed suicide. Immediately, the LTTE resorted to violent acts, totally ignoring the accord. After all diplomatic efforts failed, the IPKF too resorted to the hard option in order to uphold the accord. Additional forces were inducted and military operations launched to disarm the LTTE. Very intense operations had to be launched over the next 2 months in order to wrest control of the Jaffna Peninsula, which was totally under the domination of the LTTE. Heavy battles took place to regain the Jaffna fort, the Jaffna town, and the railway station. The LTTE, according to an estimate, had a hardcore strength of 6,500 fighters, both male and female. Of this, nearly 2,200 were in IPKF custody, for whom we had to establish a prisoner of war camp manned by a CRPF unit. Many others died in combat, while a large number were wounded and incapacitated. The remaining strength of about 500 to 700 LTT hardcore fighters, along with their supporters, withdrew into the primary forests of Vavunia in order to survive and to fight another day. Of course, they retained the ability to carry out hit-and-run raids anywhere in Vavunia, Jaffna, and even Colombo. Two peculiarities of the LTT operations were, firstly, the high level of their motivation can be judged from the fact that the use of the suicide pill by the LT tigers was widespread. The extreme step was resorted to by individuals to avoid being taken alive as prisoners or as acceptance of shame or failure in a given task. Secondly, the use of the improvised explosive device, IED, by the LTTE was brilliant and effective. Consequently, the IPKF paid a heavy price in terms of loss of lives and equipment. It proved to be a weapon to which there were few answers. There are two broad types of war. The first type is the conventional overground war, where armed opponents are identifiable. Objective is to capture or defend territory, and destruction is large scale within a short duration. The Indo-Pak wars of 48, 65, 71 and Kargil were conventional wars. The second type are the people's wars, where opponents fight for the minds of the people at large. It is not tanks, guns, nor territory which is to be captured, but the entire population is to be won over for a cause. The rulers to be overthrown and breakaway independence counted as victory. The methods adopted are guerrilla warfare or terrorism, which is its present-day avatar. The British lost Malaya, the French lost Algeria, and the US lost Vietnam, largely to the second type of war. India won Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipur insurgencies and is winning the J&K insurgency. So the LTTE and their methods were not entirely new to the Indian forces, except a few tactics were different. Winning the hearts. Therefore, while fighting and defeating the LTTE in their overground conventional type of warfare in the Jaffna Peninsula and forcing them to resort to guerrilla type of war from the Womania jungles, the IPKF at the same time commenced the battle for the minds and hearts of the Tamil people at large, both in the northern Jaffna and eastern Trincomalee and Batticaloa regions. Some of the steps taken were: all schools were repaired, regular classes held, and various central board examinations held whenever due. The ports, airfields, roads and railway lines were repaired, and regular services started after many years of disruption. Hospitals were repaired, and water supply and electricity was restored. Banks started functioning, and commercial normalcy was created. The IPKF vacated most of the private accommodation and encouraged their owners to return. Ex gratia amounts were paid out where private accommodation was occupied by the IPKF. This was a good step towards rehabilitation. A new organization, Town Commandant Jaffna, was created. This allowed the IPKF to liaise with the government agent, which is equivalent to our district collector, in order to establish correct priorities and to maximize welfare of the common people. In a major challenge successfully implemented against heavy odds by the commander of the IPKF, General A.S. Kalkat, was the conduct of concurrent elections to the Eastern Provincial Government, the Sri Lankan Parliament, and for the office of the President of Sri Lanka. Some British members of Parliament who acted as neutral observers paid glowing tribute to their fair and efficient conduct. As a result of good operational results by the IPKF in the months of October and November 1987, the LTTE ability to establish an overground presence was seriously reduced. They suffered very heavy losses and took shelter in the Womania jungles to survive and to wage a long-duration guerrilla war. To their credit, it must be said that the levels of motivation and ability to wage underground war remained high. The civic actions by the IPKF and the Sri Lanka administration restored normalcy at a level not experienced by the people of Jaffna in the previous 2 decades. The cause was slowly being eroded and hearts started being won. A few words about logistics. This was a major overseas operations by the Indian Armed Forces for which we were not experienced, organized, nor equipped. The logistics challenge had 2 components. A 70,000 strong military force with its vehicles and equipment having been inducted into the operational sector had to be maintained overseas. This led to an average of about 500 personnel moving in and out of Sri Lanka on a daily basis on account of leave and various other tasks. Any local procurement done within Sri Lanka was to avoid any shortages or price rise. Consequently, huge quantities of goods had to be procured and transported from Indian mainland. For example, 14 different types of petroleum products, all in barrels, and 35,000 goats/sheep every month had to be transported by ship. Such a large force has to be primarily supported by sea transportation. Suitable type of commodity ships, troop-carrying ships, port facilities, and port organizations had to be created beforehand. These need to be of dual use so that they can be used both in peace and war, and be cost effective. For the IPKF in Sri Lanka, Chennai was the major logistic base because of the existing port facilities, the International Civil Airport, and the Air Force Air Base facilities at Tambaram. Many innovations were done, ad hoc organizations and facilities were created in order to meet the logistics challenge. Change of government policy by Sri Lanka. Shri Premadasa was elected as the President of Sri Lanka and took office on 2nd January 1989. Immediately on assumption of office, he declared that the IPKF should leave Sri Lanka. What political or diplomatic factors were involved is not in my knowledge. Perhaps Sri Lankan nationalism was resurgent. It appears that the Sri Lankan leadership and the LTTE arrived at an understanding to together work towards the exit of the IPKF from Sri Lanka. As assistance, the LTT reportedly received 1,000 rifles and certain other assurances. The change of government in India towards the end of 1989 and formation of the VP Singh government too was perhaps a factor. De-induction of the IPKF. After some degree of vacillation, planning began for the pullout of the IPKF. This began in the middle of 1989 and was completed by 25 March 1990. While aircraft were utilized for some critical loads, most de-induction was by sea from the ports of KKS and Trincomalee to the port of Madras, now Chennai. Nearly 150 military special trains were utilized to reach various destinations in India. The government of Tamil Nadu boycotted the IPKF as Tamil killers. The Prime Minister could not come to Chennai to welcome back the IPKF. A token representation of 1,200 personnel of IPKF were flown from Chennai to Palam Airport for a few hours to be welcomed back by the Prime Minister of India and then flown back to Chennai. Lessons learned. Many people have often commented that the IPKF failed in its mission. Yes, the IPKF failed to obliterate the LTTE and Tamil resistance between November 87, when operations began against the LTT, and mid-1989, when it commenced its pullback from Sri Lanka. Any knowledgeable person will tell you that such insurgencies take decades to succeed. The military operational success described to you above was brilliant by all standards and was at a very heavy cost of over 1,100 lives of brave Indians. So what failed? If anything failed, then it was the politics and the diplomacy of both governments of that time. For India, the main lesson in my view was, let a people resolve their own ethnic problems. A wise Sri Lankan President Jayawardene got India to do its dirty job for them. An ultra-nationalistic President Premadasa got fooled by the LTTE and prematurely asked the IPKF to leave halfway a task which had just begun to show results. As far as the Tamils of Sri Lanka and their sword arm, the LTTE is concerned, they lacked a clear vision of what they wanted, what was possible. In my view, the 1987 Accord was the best solution for both parties if substantially implemented. Sri Lanka has paid a heavy price for this lack of vision and maturity. The conduct of the Indian Tamil population and their local political leaders has shown weaknesses in our national fabric and in our unity. Thank you.